now I will give floor to Jean-Pierre Alken, who is head of Unit D1 with wonderful name, a unit for macro regions, transnational, interregional, external cooperation, and enlargement. So Jean-Pierre, again, thank you, and screen is yours.
Thank you very much, Ivana. Thank you, Petra, and also Carlos for the very good introduction. I will be very short. I will introduce the framework in which the program dealing with the Interac programs working on the external borders are going to operate for the next 7 years. And I would like to start by bouncing back on one of the sentences pronounced by Petra whenever she spoke about the regulation. We are nearly there. Indeed, we hope to have the regulation adopted in the coming 2 months, but we know it is not the end. It is only the end of the beginning, because it is by then only that the program will be adopted. And that's really when all work in terms of implementation will really start. To come back on how important those programs are for the European Union, I would like just to remind you the way the priorities are defined in the European Union. First, we have the priorities of the college. The College of the Commissioner, you know that they are appointed for 5 years and they've defined their own priorities. Below that, we have the policies. Below that level, with the strategies, and then with the programs. It's important to keep all this in mind, because as you would see, you are contributing to the full spectrum of priorities of the European Union. First of all, let's keep in mind the priorities of President von der Leyen. The first one is the European Green Deal, as you know, and this is really something which is at the center of your work and of our work. The second priority, which is now being upgraded to some extent, it is the digital transition, is to make sure that Europe and the countries we are working with are fit for the digital age. The third one, which has taken also a very different, I would say, a role, is to make sure that the economy is working for everyone. And there we have in particular the concern of making sure that we can recover from the COVID crisis, that we don't leave any country behind, that we don't leave any region behind, and that we don't leave any citizen behind. And it's also, we want also to promote the resilience of everyone, so that we are sure that whenever we face such a big challenge again, we hope that it will not be the case, but whenever we face such a big challenge again, we are better prepared. That's very much the principle of building back better. Among those priorities, the fourth one is a stronger EU in the world. And there it's very clearly the European view of the stronger EU is that we are strong whenever we have a strong partnership with the countries we are working with. That's something which is very much part of the DNA of the European Union. You know that we are multilateral, and this is where we see immediately that you are contributing also to this objective. And this was taken also on board from day one. Whenever we prepared the new regulation, we agreed that the Interac programs have a specific role to play into building a strong relation with the countries which are around us. By the countries which are around us, we speak about what we call the IPA countries, the ENI countries, but also the countries which are around the outermost regions, which are very much the outpost of the European Union. And this is why now we've created in the Interac regulation a home for all those programs. And it also reflects the increased importance we are giving to those programs. Below this, we have the policies. And in here, we are implementing 3 policies. One is the cohesion policy as all Interac programs, but then we're also implementing 2 other policies, the enlargement policy and the neighborhood policy. And what is very important is that we are implementing those policies by construction, meaning that for the Interac Next CBC program and the Interac IPA programs, whenever we speak about CBC programs, we are going to have at least an equal funding from those two policies to those Interac programs. And that's very important because it reflects the fact that those programs are contributing on basically equal footing to those policies. And then something which is also very important is that we have strategies, and often those strategies have a geographical anchorage, and in here there are macro regional strategies which are also operating on a space in which numerous programs are going to intervene. And this is something also extremely important because those strategies are designed in order to accelerate the implementation of the key EU priorities, the Green Deal, the digital transition, the recovery, a stronger EU in the world, while also adapting and suiting those goals to the needs of the area we are intervening in. And that's something important because by those strategies, we want to also increase ownership of all the regions which are participating to the strategy in the implementation of the goals. And then below that, we have for sure the muscles, we have what is going to put, I would say, the energy into the achievement of those goals, and those are the programs. As I mentioned, so we have a cascade of objectives, and then we have the tools, which are the programs, and therefore the programs, we have also some level of ambitions, which are coming from the opportunity created by bringing all the programs under the same roof. The first thing is that we would like to enhance the cooperation and coordination among programs. Each program has a specific added value by nature. We have the transnational programs, we have the cross-border cooperation program, which are covering different, I would say, size of program areas, which are allowing us to meet different objectives. But it's very important that those programs remain connected to each other in order to make sure that we are using the comparative advantage of each program. That's something important. Among coordination, it's also important to look at what is done with the geographical tools. In here, we are meaning the tools which are implemented within the EU, notably the ERDF mainstream program, but also the geographical tools like the MIPS designed for the neighborhood policy, but also the programs which are designed for the enlargement countries. And then something very important is that we have made major progress for the programs working the outermost regions in order to better connect them with the programs which are developed in the countries which are surrounding the outermost regions. So this is where we want to go. We have already defined the priorities. We have also defined some key elements of way to implement those programs. And now I will also come to some elements which are more specific to some by typology of program. We have still some, I would say, common good practice that we would like to encourage. The first one is to make sure that we speed up to the maximal extent the adoption of all the programs. We know it is very complex. We know that you are still implementing the 2014-2020 programs. But nevertheless, we ask you to make the extra effort to make sure that the programs are adopted as soon as possible in order to maximize the time of implementation. The second is for sure to come with appropriate level of ambitions for the performance orientation, and that's something very important, so that you have the right level, the right targets, but also to be sure that the principle of the partnership are properly used in order to maximize the ownership of the programs within Europe and also within all countries around Europe. We also invite you to look at all the new tools, as the regulation provide tools which are deemed to be easier but also more efficient in order to deliver the goals we want to achieve. I'm notably thinking about the small project funds, the small scale operation, or the territorial instrument. And then in particular for the programs operating in the EPA countries, we may also consider some investment facilities as a tool to implement, financial instrument in order to meet those goals. Then there are also some very important aspects whenever we speak about the political nature of the programs, to be sure that we are serving also to reinforce the relation between the EU member states and the countries which are participating to the program. That's something that you may always have in the back of your mind. And then in addition to what I just mentioned, we've also some elements which are very important for the countries, which are for the program, which are operating in the IPA countries, which is also to already provide, I would say, a form of training for those countries to use the instrument they will be using once becoming a member state. And there, notably, we should maximize the fact that the Interac programs operating across the border are the first opportunity for non-EU countries to be using exactly the same tools, exactly the same system as member states are using, and that's a training to be ready to implement at some stage the cohesion funds. That's something very important, but it's also a tool which are designed to implement also a large spectrum of EU policies. I think I will leave it at that for the key message we wanted to pass collectively. I would like to thank again all the Interac colleagues and the TESIM colleagues for the great organization work they made this week. I would like also to associate myself to all the persons who have congratulated the organizers of the session that took place 7 days ago on the 14th of April. That was attended by 400 participants. I think this is quite a record in terms of event organized with Interac. And I also would like to seize this opportunity to say a few words about the colleagues who have prepared this event together with Interac and TESIM, and who are working in the Commission. I'm speaking about Simona, Gilles, Philippe, and Pierre-Emmanuel. So Simona is the team leader for the team working with the countries of the neighborhood. So it is what we call the ENICBC team, but they are preparing very much also the Interac Next program. Gilles Kittel is the team leader for the IPA team, but this team is also overseeing the macro-regional strategy user. Philippe is one of the active members of the ENICBC team, and then Pierre-Emmanuel is the team leader of the team dealing with outermost region programs, so the new Strand D, and also the maritime programs. So thank you to all of you for preparing this meeting and this session, and I'm really looking forward to see the outcome of your work. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon from my side. I'm very happy to see so many familiar names. Unfortunately, not faces directly, but at least names from our IPA CBC and ENI CBC programs that I know personally, and a warm welcome as well for all the programs which have some external dimension. As it was already said, today's event is the second part of the series of events presenting the new set of legal rules. So please understand it as a continuation of the event that took place on the 14th of April. Therefore, most of the provisions applicable to all Interac programs will not be repeated today. We would really like to ask you to focus as well your questions on the specific issues which are relevant for the participation of the non-EU countries or to external cooperation. Our meeting today has the same prerogatives as the meeting last week. So let me quickly repeat them. What we will present to you today is based on the latest legal texts as they are available to us during the lawyer linguist checks. We can say that the most of the text is stable. However, there are still some adjustments which are taking place, namely to correct some inconsistencies and imprecisions, let's say. Our today presentation will be divided into 3 parts. In the first introductory part, you will hear about the legal architecture and the leading features for the programming. Some of it may not be specific to external programs, but however, we consider those features as very important. So that's why we want to remind them to you. In the second part, we will concentrate on more technical aspects of the programming, like the financial management, the recoveries, and so on and so forth. And in the last part of our presentation, we will present you one by one the specific provisions of the Chapter 8, dealing with the participation of third countries. And at the very end of the presentation, Pierre-Emmanuel will present the specific provisions for Strand D cooperation. So let's move immediately in the session 1 issues, and thank you very much for the slide. As it was highlighted many times, the 2021-27 programming period brings all the cooperation programs under the shared management supported by the European Union together. If we can imagine the Interac as a river, which started as a small flow 31 years ago, and has become a very powerful stream nowadays with its own regulation, own policy objectives, own set of common indicators, and so on. And I believe that IPA-CBC programs have in their own way already very strongly mixed the waters of their own stream with the Interac in this program period, even if the legal basis for IPA-CBC still remains to be the IPA rules. As for the ENI-CBC programs, or as they will be called in the future, Interac Next, they are flowing into this Interac river right now. Let me ensure that it's not really the idea that the specific ambience of the waters of the external cooperation will get diluted in the Interac river. On the contrary, they are going to enrich the waters by their own experience and features, and those specific features which are being kept, and the external cooperation programs will remain an important part of the external policy toolbox. In more prosaic terms, this will translate into a single set of rules for both internal and external cooperation programs. If we take it from the continuation changes point of view, I believe that for IPA-CBC, the new legal setup represents to a high degree a continuation. For ENI-CBC, as our TESIM colleagues say as well, it's a continuity with a twist. So we hope to be able to do our utmost to accompany the ENI-CBC programs to become Interac Next smoothly. As it has been highlighted by Moray Gilland many times, the cooperation was always perceived as a very complex issue, also for the programs on EU external borders. And we strongly believe that this time the Commission made it to the word and fulfilled what we have promised. So we really made it to radically simplify the implementation requirements, namely for the beneficiaries. So we would really like to strongly encourage you to make the advantage of those simplified measures. Let me now elaborate on the legal architecture for the Interac Next, before I hand over to Gilles, who will cover the legal architecture for IPA. So the next slide, please. Here we can see very clearly that the primarily legal rules are the Parliament and the Council regulation. It's not new, it's the Common Provisions Regulation, the ERDF regulation, and the Interac regulation. I just would like to remind for the external programs that the legal framework is conceived primarily for several EU instruments for internal policies. So this is, of course, reflected in the most important features of this legal framework, such as the definition of the policy objectives. We still expect that the cohesion policy legal package should be adopted by June this year. As for the Interac Next programs, they will continue to be financed from both ERDF and the external funding, namely from the Neighborhood Development and International Cooperation Instrument. The acronym is NDICI. So some articles of the NDICI regulation also apply. There are cross-references between the Interac regulation and the NDICI regulation. The cross-border cooperation in the large understanding of the term in the NDICI regulation, which includes transnational and interregional cooperation, is covered by the Article 22 of the NDICI regulation. Just in brackets, the timeline for the adoption of the NDICI regulation should be similar to the one for the cohesion policy package. In the Interac regulation, the article which makes the cross-referencing to the NDICI is the Article 10, which is called cross-fund provisions. And this brings us immediately to the secondary legislation. So I will ask for the next slide, where we will speak about namely the implementing acts. So first of all, there will be 2 implementing acts relevant for all Interac programs, including for Interac Next. On one hand, the list of the Interac programs with the eligible areas for every Interac program. And on the other hand, the list of the Interac programs with the budgetary allocations. As you very well know, the Commission, we have already started preparing the 2 acts so that we can adopt them as soon as the primary legislation is adopted. The third implementing act, which is the multi-annual strategy document, is a continuation of the ENI-CBC strategic programming document that ENI-CBC programs know very well in the current period. The ENI-CBC community has discussed the first draft of it, as it was labeled joint paper on Interac Next, in January 2020, where we presented it to you during our annual event in Brussels. So now, together with the External Action Service colleagues, we are preparing a revised version of the joint paper, and we hope to be able to share it with the member states and the partner countries and with you, the programs, for information very soon. As we will speak about the cooperation program submission and adoption and about the financing agreements later during this session, I will not elaborate on them further, and I will now hand over directly to Gilles to continue. So Gilles, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Simona. So good afternoon to everyone. So for IntraIGAP, actually, it's quite similar to what Simona has just shown to you. The cascade that you have just seen. This slide is just to highlight that we are still dependent on different regulations. You see that at the top of the pyramid, we have the NDICI regulation, because the IPA 3 regulation is to a certain extent driven by the NDICI regulation. There are many references. Under that, you have the specific rules for implementing IPA 3. This is still under discussion whether this will there will be such a rules. Maybe you are aware that there are still discussion actually on the IPA regulation as such, more, let's say, on the comitology aspects, or at least the different roles to be played by the institutions. But nonetheless, if you see now, you look at the bottom of the pyramid, that's the programming framework, and that is actually the strategic document for us and for IPA 3 mainstream programs. So it is set out in the Article 7 of the draft IPA 3 regulation. Actually, the document is fully drafted. It has been consulted. So we are very much now waiting for the adoption of this pyramid of legal acts. But it's just to at least pass the message to the Interac IPA programs. The document, the strategic document exists, and we think you can refer to it. It is stable. And that's the most important, you see, for your programming work right now. I also mentioned on this slide that there are many cross-program provisions in the IPA 3 regulation. That is something that the lawyers, linguists are now checking. So it's a relatively time-consuming work that they're doing, but very important, obviously, to ensure that there is a real consistency among our regulations. Next slide, please, Robert. Yeah, so about the strategic document, IPA 3 strategic document. So it is called by Engineer as the IPA 3 programming framework. It consists of windows, and actually the windows that should, let's say, concern you the most is the window 5 about territorial and cross-border cooperation. In this window, you have actually the IPA money for our IntraIGAP programs together with the IPA CBC programs managed by Engineer. But in reality, the vast, let's say, majority of the funds under window 5 are reserved for IntraIGAP. Next slide, Robert. Thank you. So also to highlight in the ETC regulation, we are distinguishing three, let's say, categories of countries that you can see. So you have first the third countries which do not receive support from the Interac funds. And as an example, we are mentioning Norway or Switzerland. The second category is about the overseas countries and territories. And the third one, which is, let's say, the larger one and probably the most important for at least Simona and for my team, is the partner countries, which comprise the PAC countries, the countries covered by the neighborhood geographic area, and the Russian Federation. Next slide. Thank you, Robert. Yeah, so it's also here to tell you that the partnership principle that you are certainly already familiar with is really should be at the heart of your work. So the concept is really wide. It's not just about involving national and regional public authorities. It's also a principle that you need to apply continuously and not just from time to time when you are consulting stakeholders. It should ensure a balanced representation. It's very important for us, and we will certainly insist in the coming weeks and months on that. And obviously, we know that there are still probably some room for improvement in this context. The use of TA can be very welcome in this respect. Robert, thank you. So you see, just to confirm, you see what Simona and Jean-Pierre already told you. We consider that now internal and external cooperation are actually constitute the Interac family. We are all members of the same family. We share in reality, in general, the same challenges, and we are convinced that the replies that we are developing to a large extent can be shared between the two, let's say, sides of, or the two branches of the family. It's also very important, and that is re-emphasized in the new regulation, the link that you will make with the macro regional strategies. And you know that our unit D1 is dealing with those 4 macro regional strategies. So this is certainly an area where we will be extremely sensitive. Also, in the regulation that we are proposing, there are more links, let's say, between the different strands. And there's this idea that we should be more synergetic. We should have actually a more integrated approach between the different programs. And there are obviously, but that was already mentioned in the previous slide by Simona and then by me, there are also links to the external policy instrument and the strategic frameworks. Robert, next slide. So about the thematic concentration. This slide is in reality the slide that you maybe already, you might have seen already last week. It's just here to highlight that regarding the second bullet, it's only so that at least 60% of the ERDF on maximum 4 policy objectives, including PO2 and PO4. This is valid only for internal land borders, not for external ones. For the rest, you have so this first concentration about the 60% on a maximum of 3 policy objectives, of which PO2 is compulsory, but that is also very much in line with what Jean-Pierre told you about the challenges that the EU in general is facing, and that's certainly something important. Then the third bullet is about the 2 ISO objectives, but we will talk about that more in the coming slides. So ISO 1 and ISO 2, but you see, unfortunately, I have to say, especially for ISO 2, the co-legislators at the very last minute decreased the threshold. That's a bit unfortunate, I have to say, but nonetheless, we trust your creativity to still exploit the potential of this second Interac specific objective. Next slide, thank you. So for Interac B, you see what we highlight is that you need to have a strong link with the related macro regional strategy or sea basin strategy where they exist, obviously. And purposely, I mentioned also Interac C, strand Interac T, strand C, just to tell you that there might be some, let's say, external fund contribution to those programs. We are still discussing, so I cannot be much more clear right now, but we know that Interac Fund is already supporting very much the Interac IPA programs, but we are discussing now whether we cannot also allocate some, for instance, some IPA fund to some of those programs. Thank you. So next, so I then hand over to Simona for ISO 1. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilles. On the ISO 1, you have heard a lot already during the last week, so I will not repeat all the concept of the Interac specific objective 1. I just wanted to highlight here for you the specific action which is now was numbered as action E, support to democracy and civil society, because as you should know, the Interac specific objectives are considered on the same level in the programming as policy objectives. So the actions which are mentioned in the article are considered as sort of a specific objective to this Interac specific objective. So this action or specific objective on the support to democracy and civil society was actually there. The background of that is coming from the external world, from the external cooperation. And but I understand that during the legal process, it has been as well offered to the internal programs. And it's just important to highlight that there especially we would like to encourage you and to invite you to have a look of what the Commission is doing for under the external policy. So to take into account the work for supporting democracy and civil society under the IPA 3 framework, under the revised European Neighbourhood Policy, as well as the NDICI programming guidelines, which are being developed by our colleagues in EIS and DG NEAR at the moment. What we see as which could be really the areas where our programs can invest would be namely in the support to the local authorities and to increase the capacities of the civil society. We as well see as a very important and having a great potential to involve young people. Definitely, this kind of action should support more transparency, better democratic institutions, and better administration, be it on the regional or local level, anti-corruption measures, decentralization, which is also part of the package. How to do that? Well, there are many ways. The ones that we mention here are people-to-people cooperation. Yet again, here we would like to stress that people-to-people is a preferred mean for the cooperation actions. Cooperation on local level, peer-to-peer learning, support to youth organizations, and so on and so forth. So thank you, and I hand over back to Gilles for the ISO 2. Gilles.
Yes, thank you, Simona. So you see shortly, because that was already covered by Moray last week, but just to insist that now ISO 2 is, let's say, set up for all Interac strands, which was not the first idea of the Commission. And the second main message that we want to pass to you is there's a much bigger emphasis following, let's say, the insistence of the co-legislators to include a protection of the people with a migrant background. So that is really an additional dimension which has been added quite lately to this provision. Okay, so I think we can move on. Thank you. Sorry. Now, because I will hand over to Philippe, I assume soon, but just to tell you that in the session 2, which we will talk about financial management, so programming, financial management as such, and then a topic that I'm sure you are fond of, recoveries. That is a very hot topic, but for sure, Philippe will tell you a lot about this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilles. And if we can maybe continue with the next slide, Robert. And first of all, good morning, everyone. Just a short internal question, Simona, if you would like to take the first slide, or if I should go on with that, if you could just let me know.
Please go on.
Okay, thank you. So again, good morning, everyone, and good afternoon, actually, everyone. So yes, here the first slide is with some, let's say, specific elements for programming for the programs which are partly co-financed by the external funds. So what is actually unique for our programs is that the deadline for the submission of the program document is linked not only, or the link in the regulation is not about coming into force of the EU legal framework of the Interac regulation, but of the relevant multi-annual strategy document. And as it was already said before by Simona and by Gilles, we do hope that for both IPA and DICI, those documents will be ready very soon, just after we can do it. So just after the publication of the Interac and DICI and IPA regulation. The deadline is calculated as the 9 months from the adoption of those two multi-annual strategy documents. And what is also important is that it's not only the deadline for submission, but there is also a requirement for us, for the Commission, to and for the programs, to be sure that what will be supported from the Interac programs with external funding is in line with the text of those two multi-annual strategy document. If we can go on to the next slide. Yes, this is a slide which, after all this, let's say, very positive and encouraging words from the previous speakers, we come to Article 12 about the discontinuation and return of the resources. So I should probably start by saying that I think all of us hope very much that we will not need to use those provisions, but they are, of course, extremely needed, as this is one of the, let's say, legal tools that we have which should be used in case there are some, let's say, major problems with implementation of or even with preparation of our programs. So first of all, let's start with the situation where we still did not receive the draft of the program document. So if we do not receive the program, and I mean the Commission from the stakeholders, from the program stakeholders, then we should act if it doesn't happen by the end of March 2022. If this is the case, then we will need to reprogram the relevant annual allocation for 2022. I will say a few words in a moment what to do with this allocation. The same happens if we still don't have the program by the end of March 2023, then the allocation for 2022 should be already, let's say, reprogrammed in 22. And then if the program document is not sent to us by 2023, then we need to, let's say, repeat the exercise for the annual budget, annual, let's say, commitment from the EU funds available for 2023. And finally, let's say the last deadline here is the end of March 2024. So if by this time there is no program submitted to us, then we need to reprogram the whole allocation for the still not reprogrammed before allocation for the whole programming period, and this I hope will not happen. So in this Article 12, it's very, let's say, written in very details what should happen with the relevant contribution from ERDF and from the external funds. What is important for the ERDF is that it should be reprogrammed to another program, Interac program from the same category, like an external program, or if it is not possible, then to the other internal Interac program. As for the NDICI and IPA allocation, they actually have to go back to the relevant, let's say, types of programs, external programs like under NDICI and IPA. So they could also come back to some other Interac external programs, but this is probably more like, let's say, would require still some ad hoc consultations with the member state, with us, but also with the engineer. The second element here is about discontinuation. And here we talk about the situation where actually a program was submitted, cooperation program was submitted, was approved, the implementation has started, but unfortunately, due to some other reasons and because of some, let's say, problems, it cannot be fully implemented. The conditions, or the let's say the starting points, the conditions which you can see on the slide are very similar to the ones which exist in the current Interac, in the current ETC regulation for 2014-2020. So basically, if the financing agreement is not concluded, is not signed by a certain deadline, which I will also come back on the other slide about financing agreements, we enter into the situation, or if there is some problem with the program implementation as such. As I said in the past, we had situations like that, so we used this option, but I think we all hope that it will not be needed, it will not be necessary in the future. And then the procedure for the, let's say, still available yearly contribution is quite similar to the one described for the return of resources. In the article, you have also like a specific part of it, which is about transnational programs. And here, the basic, let's say, principle is quite similar, but we have to remember that with transnational programs, we have many different types of them. So we have transnational programs which were, let's say, which are set up in order to facilitate the cooperation between the member states and non-EU countries. But we also have other transnational programs which are mostly implemented between the member state, and there is only some, let's say, limited participation from the partner countries, from the non-EU countries. So because of that, we have, let's say, more flexible possibilities given by the regulation. Of course, in case of any programs, such programs can be also discontinued. They can be there can be a reduction of the budget, or if it's also justified, they can actually continue as such without some partner country, which actually for which there is some, let's say, problematic situation. Yes, thank you. If you can go on. The article about co-financing rates here, I think for most of the programs would agree that we have, let's say, a more positive situation, as again we continue with the fact that for all three categories of programs which are represented today, so Strand D outermost programs, but also from the IPA and Interac Next, the rules are more, let's say, positive and more beneficial than for normal Interac programs, in the meaning that the co-financing rates are higher. So for outermost, for the Strand D program, the maximum co-financing rate is 85%. For the IPA, it's also 85%, and for Interac Next, it is 90%. What are maybe two other elements which I would like to tackle is that for transnational programs, we have in Article 13 on co-financing rate, we introduce this differentiation for a transnational program. So the higher co-financing rates are available for the programs where European Regional Development Fund is not more than half of the program allocation. So it looks a bit maybe complicated, but it means that for the programs which are primarily implemented with the non-EU countries, with the partner countries, they will get the same treatment as the CBC, IPA or Interac Next programs. And one more information for the neighborhood programs is that there is also a change, actually, what is a co-financing rate? Because if you compare the provisions of the ENI implementing rules, then you would see that the definition itself of co-financing was a bit different. Now we use the definition of co-financing rate, how it is applicable in the cohesion policy programs. So those levels, those thresholds, they mean that it's, let's say, 90%. The EU contribution can be maximum 90% of the total available budget. It was differently calculated for the current ENI CBC program. So this would be about co-financing. Then maybe one more information, that the co-financing rate is calculated this time on the program level. Now coming to technical assistance, I don't want to repeat, actually, we had last week on this big event quite a detailed presentation about the technical assistance, but here I just put some specific elements for the external programs. So basically, what is important are the thresholds and are the, let's say, limits, the target of a flat rate available for technical assistance, which for all of those programs is 10%, both for IPA, Interac Next, but also Strand D programs. And again, we have the same system according to which the same, let's say, beneficial rules apply for transnational programs where ERDF is not more than 50% of the overall allocation. Another important information, because we received some questions before the meeting, is that there are also some specific provisions which describe the situation of the programs with limited budget. So if you can see, for programs in this category between 30 million euros and 50 million euros, the flat rate is automatically increased by 500,000 euros. And as the regulation uses the term according to which this additional allocation shall be given to those programs, then it's actually the situation which will be automatically happen for them. And finally, there was also a question: what will happen with the programs with total budget below 30 million euros? Then the flat rate is actually will be decided when the program is approved by us. So it will be a part of some program negotiations. If we could go on, thank you. The third element, very much linked with the financial management of the programs, is about pre-financing. And here the situation is very similar for IPA and Interac Next programs, meaning that, again, those programs have a slightly, or not even slightly, but a different and in a way more preferential treatment than the rest of the Interac programs. And first of all, I should also stress that the same wording exists when it comes to the differentiation of the transnational programs. So the transnational programs which could use these options are programs which get not more than 50% of ERDF contribution in their budgets. So what are the differences? So first of all, it's how much the programs can get of the pre-financing. For the IPA-C, IPA CBC, the system is like a continuation to the current ones. So it is 50% of the allocation for the first 3 years of the program implementation. I hope I'm correct here. For Interac Next, there is a limitation of up to 80% of annual available allocation. And there is a link with the, let's say, implementation pace of the program. So it's this pre-financing for future Interac Next programs. When it comes, it should also we should also receive from the programs the information about the actual payment needs. So we see that, and we can verify that actually this payment is the payment of this, let's say, high pre-financing is justified. And one more element, which is both for IPA and for Interac Next, and I think which is very important, is the issue of clearance. So for those two categories of programs, the clearing of the previously paid pre-financing can happen at the latest at the closure of the program. Of course, we again do hope that we will receive enough interim payment claims and enough, let's say, costs reported in the annual closures that it will happen sooner. But we will continue with the system which is now existing for the ENI CBC programs, that the clearing can also happen at the closure of the program. So there will be no issue of, let's say, offsetting or limiting of the pre-financing payments because of that. Thank you. This is the slide which actually was very well prepared and well presented last week by my colleague Dirk Peters. So I don't want to repeat the slide, but I just put it here as of course the issue of exchange rate is of particular importance for the programs with participation of the non-member states. And here the important information is that Article 28 of Interac regulation actually defines one method which should be used for the calculation of the exchange rate. And this is the time when the expenditure is actually submitted for verification from the beneficiaries. If we can continue. And here, this slide is also a repetition from last week, and I don't want to repeat all the rules for recoveries, and there is of course a specific Article 52, but just to say about maybe two elements which are maybe important and a bit specific, for at least for some of the external programs. So first of all, we should understand that for the future, there is no differentiation which existed for the ENI CBC programs about the responsibility for private and public beneficiaries by the partner countries. Now the rules are actually similar when it comes to possible liabilities of partner or public beneficiaries. So this is the first element, and the second element is that there are some specific rules applicable, I would say, for the situation when we have programs with non-member states when it comes to offsetting. And this is the situation under which we are in, let's say, in the last part of the whole process, in the last step, where it is the European Commission which orders and sends the recovery order. So if we are in this unfortunate situation and before the system could not, during the previous steps, the irregularity was not settled, then when we send the recovery order to the partner countries, we are also entitled, where possible, to offset this recovery order by against payments under other external programs financed by the EU. So for most of the partner countries, we have some either IPA programs or NDK programs. Of course, this will not be the case probably, unfortunately, when it comes to the Russian Federation, where the CBC cooperation is the only programs where Russian Federation now is active. And here I would like to pass the screen to Simona. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Philip, for your very detailed and informative presentation. So here we jump immediately in the section 3 already, so the last section of our presentation, where we will present the specific features for the participation of the non-EU countries in the Interac regulation, so so-called Chapter 8 specific provisions. Let's jump immediately into the first slide, which is on the program authorities, Article 54. So the Interac governance and the Interac program authorities were very well presented by colleagues during the session on the 14th of April. So here this article is relatively short, and it really only complements the main article on the program authorities. It's important to understand that in general, the Interac programs do not really encourage and welcome any setup of single-sided authorities which represent purely national interests. We consider that those usually undermine the joint character of the programs. But however, we do acknowledge that the situation with the programs, including participation of non-EU countries, is specific. So, and it requires specific adjustments. So therefore, there is this article which introduces the term of national or regional authority, which should be some sort of a contact point for the managing authority, without really specifying what the role of such an authority or such a contact point should be. According to the latest provision of the program template that we have, it looks like that the programs with the non-EU countries will be invited as well to submit the contact details for the national authorities in the program template relevant part on the program authorities. Having said that, I said that there are no specific roles assigned to the national contact point or national authority. This is not entirely true, because there is one specific task explicitly mentioned, and this is a task which relates to communication and visibility of the programs. However, if there is a branch office set in the partner country, which is also there allowed for the partner countries explicitly. There indeed, this communication task can be taken by, on one hand, either the branch office, or on the other hand, the national authority, or as we call it, contact point. We received a number of questions related to this article. So let me quickly go into those. First question was that these contact points are only foreseen in the partner countries, and if the program should decide to establish them in the EU participating countries. As I have said, from the regulation itself, to me, it seems that the regulation does not really imply that there would be national authorities in the member state, for example, in the member state countries. So my reply would be no. The national authorities, as I said, do not have, the regulation does not really specify any concrete tasks apart from this communication task. However, this means that if we take, for example, the management verifications, which would be typically a role for the managing authority under the centralized system, we can conceive, or we can accept that this contact point or the national authority in the future programs takes as well on board the tasks related to the current control contact points in the ENI CBC programs. We have received a specific question on that, and the answer is yes. The role of the CCP can be undertaken by that national contact point as per Article 54. I would stop at that and hand over for the next slide. I believe it will be Gilles who will present the Article 56. Gilles.
Thank you, Simona. So very quickly, there are, you see, specific arrangement for eligibility of expenditure for partner countries. As you can see, they can be eligible, but there are conditions to respect. So they should be incurred and paid after the 1st of January 2021 or from the date of the program submission, whichever the date is earlier, but they can be claimed only later. Regarding the technical assistance expenditure, again, they can be they are possible before the financing agreement is signed. This is the same for the call for project and the selection of operations. So those are specificities that we wanted to highlight to you. Next slide, thank you. Yeah, and then there is, well, a novelty in a way, which is at least for not maybe for the next program, but for the others, those LIPs, the Article 7. So we want to insist, because we receive a few questions on that we are talking about infrastructure projects. So when we are talking about the threshold of 2.5 million, we refer to the infrastructure costs. So you see there are also other conditions to consider. So it's a set of works, activities and services, so that is possible, but they should fulfill an indivisible function. They should have obviously quite clear cooperation, cross-border or transnational impacts and benefits. They are subject to the applicable public procurement rules. And then they are also related to those LIPs some obligation with regard to the concept note that you have to submit to the Commission. So 2 months before the steering committee, which envisages to select such a project. The description of the project should be also let's say detailed in this concept notes. but it should not be too detailed. So maximum 3 pages. So you see, we are quite prescriptive on our expectations. Thank you. So now I hand over to Philippe, and I will answer later to the IPA question, because I saw that there were a question on the IPA regulation, but I assume we will have time at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gilles. And now, let's say, the two last slides from my side before I hand over to Pierre-Emmanuel. So first, about the procurement, we have dedicated articles about which defines what are the procurement rules which should be used here. I should maybe add, which is not on the slide, that we also, of course, we write also that, of course, for the EU beneficiaries, which are, let's say, which fall down under the procurement rules, then of course they have to use the relevant EU rules and the relevant national rules adopted by every member state. But for the non-EU beneficiaries, the basic, I would say, rule applicable probably to in most of the situations is that we have 2 articles in the financial regulation which define the external procurement, and on top to this we have also a dedicated annex or chapter in the annex to the financial regulation. So over there you can find the detailed conditions for the external procurement in case the EU funds, the EU budget funds, are used by the outside of the EU by the beneficiaries coming from non-member states. There is one additional provision that in case a partner country transfers the co-financing directly to the managing authority, then the beneficiaries who are public authorities can use their national rules, and they are defined in Article 58, some minimal conditions which still have to be met, which is I put here in the brackets, that of course then the decision on the procurement should be done based on best value for money or on a lower price, and of course no conflict of interest should also be secured, and we should check that there was no. And finally, about financing agreements. This is, of course, not a novelty. So we need to sign financing agreements in the situations where we spend some of the EU funds in the non-member states by the beneficiaries coming from partner countries. So what is important is that in Article 59, it is regulated that the basic, let's say, fact important for us is the conclusion of financing agreement. And for that, we have a deadline, which is N+1, meaning that the financing agreement should be concluded by the latest 1 year after the first commitments to the program are made. So meaning in maybe simpler words, that if the program is approved in 2021 still, then we would need to have the financing agreement concluded by the end of 2022. And if it happens in 2022, then the deadline would be end of 2023. One thing is the conclusion of the financing agreement, and for that we take into account the signatures. The other element is actually when it comes into force, and here we need to take into account the situation, but in the non-member states, in the partner countries, that according to their national rules, they may need to go and to ratify the financing agreement. And if it happens, then of course it will come into force after this ratification. It is not the case for the member states, as there is also a specific provision in Article 59, which clearly stresses that or underlines that for the member state, if they co-sign the financing agreement is not an international treaty. It is a tool necessary to implement the EU budget. So this is also clarified. As I said, already said, it is possible for the member state hosting the managing authority to co-sign the financing agreement. And if it decides not to do so, then it should sign a different agreement, the implementing agreement. It should be done at the same time. And there are some, let's say, the basic scope of those implementing agreements are defined in the regulation. But if the member state hosting the managing authority decides to co-sign the financing agreement, then everything can be put in the one document. And finally, there is a special provision added during the negotiations of the Interac regulation, according to which we, meaning the European Commission, we need to provide the first draft of the financing agreement at the moment when we approve the program. And now I would like to pass the screen to give the screen to Pierre-Emmanuel. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. I hope that everybody can hear me. I understand this is the moment of the outermost regions. I would say the challenging outermost regions. Why? Because the first thing that has to be kept in mind, very kept in mind, is that the outermost regions are separated from the other strands. They have a specific strand that is strand D, and they cannot be, as a result, assimilated to external cross-border programs. It is sometimes difficult to understand which are the rules that exactly apply to them in this Interreg regulation. In fact, what makes the difference between the outermost regions and the others is that they have the choice, they have three options with regard to external funds. Either they decide to transfer ERDF funds to partner countries, and there they fall under indirect management, or the partner countries decide to transfer funds to outermost regions cooperation programs, and then we are under the full shared management option, and there is also a mixed and intermediate management mode. So the purpose of this presentation is not to repeat all the details of the management modes. This has been done on several occasions in Interact seminars with the presence of DG Regio and also DG INPA. And outermost regions have also a contact point in Interact to whom they can channel their worries and questions. So this slide has for object to better focus on the questions and the issues that have arisen over the last weeks and sometimes rather unexpectedly. They are grouped under two chapters. The first one is the submission of programs, and the second one is the financing. Concerning the submission of programs, firstly, for all outermost regions programs, just a reminder which concerns the agreement to the content of Interreg programs. Like other programs, the third country partner countries or OSCEs shall confirm in writing their agreement to the content of an Interreg program prior to its submission to the Commission. This is the famous Article 16.5 of the Interreg regulation. What is specific for the outermost regions is that there is a derogation to this rule, as agreements may be expressed in the formally approved minutes of the consultation meetings with third countries, partner countries, or OSCE, or of the deliberation of regional integration and cooperation organization. So there is nothing new here. However, the message that the Commission would like to pass on is that the rule is in the writing agreement, and the light procedure, the derogation, is the exception. An exception that might be used where an agreement proves to be difficult to obtain. Concerning always the submission of programs, in the case of option A, that is full shared management option of Article 55, is chosen by the outermost regions programs. What happens in terms of implementing act and financing agreement? There might be some surprises. The first one concerns the implementing act setting out the multi-annual strategy document. It is written in the regulation, Article 10, paragraph 1, that this implementing act shall also cover the participation of partner countries in Interac D programs. And as we have seen earlier, a partner country is a country or territory covered by any geography area under the NDK and which receive support from the external financing instruments of the EU, Article 3. So this is also Interac D programs. You understand that this situation, this provision might create some complications due to the fact that there is a different timeline between the multi-annual documents adopted by the GMPAR and the provision for adopting documents in the Interac regulation. To make a long story short, and after a number of internal debates, it has been decided to replace the shall by a may. This should be, as a result, Interac D, an option for Interac D programs, for Strand D programs. Personally, I haven't seen the last version of the Interac regulation. I hope that the shall has been replaced by a may, but maybe our colleague of Unit B1 could give more detailed information in this respect. Concerning, finally, the financing agreements, the question is, does Article 60 of the financing agreement, in my version, this is Article 60, apply to outermost regions should they choose option A, that is when external funds are transferred to Interac program? From a pure legal point of view, the reply would be yes, as Article 60 mentions Interac programs without specifying the strands. However, some sectors in DG Regio are in favor of a more pragmatic approach. This means that as long as NDK funds are not transferred to Interac programs of Strand D, these programs would be considered as pure ERDF programs, and as a result, they would not require a financing agreement. However, this position, this stance, has still to be confirmed and is still subject to internal discussion within the Commission. I hope that we will be able to come back to you rather soon, as this is a very significant issue. Second chapter, the financing. Two specific points. The first point concerns the co-financing by third countries or partner countries should a Strand D program opt for option A, that is full shared management. In that case, third countries, partner countries, OSCE would abide by the Interreg regulation. This means that they would have to come with their own money. Of course, a rather limited amount. This would be at least 15% of the total amount, as we have seen. Co-financing for outermost regions may go up to a maximum of 85%. This being said, this national amount might also be provided thanks to bank loans or grants, or even the World Bank. This is the case for Sint Maarten, for instance. Or, but this has to be confirmed by the European Investment Bank. However, it was necessary to draw your attention on this consequence. And lastly, the specific case of overseas territories and countries, due to the combination of two provisions of the Interreg regulation, Article 37.5 and 22.1. Article 37.5 of Interreg regulation stipulates that overseas territories and countries, shall not be eligible for support from the ERDF under Interreg programs. This mainly concerns the Caribbean area, but also to a certain extent, the Indian Ocean area. There, a clarification has to be brought. That is, Regio has confirmed in front of the member states that the purpose of Article 37.5 is not to go against Article 22.1 related to the selection of Interreg operations. Consequently, ERDF can be spent on the territory of an OSCE inside the program area and without any veto by the managing authorities. These are some of the new developments that have occurred for the last weeks concerning the Strandy. We believe that it was necessary to draw the attention of our outermost regions colleagues on the consequences of that. And that might also influence or not the choice of the management mode they will make when implementing the program. Thank you very much for your attention. And now I hand over for the conclusion to Gilles.
Thank you, Pierre-Manuel. So indeed, we are almost on time. You see, we are landing with probably 2-3 minutes of delay. So just very quickly, the key takeaways that I would present are first about the architecture. So as we have shown to you, there are different strands. There is a new strand that Pierre-Manuel has just presented about the outmost region. And the last novelty that we want to highlight is that all external funds are now under, for cooperation, obviously, are under one umbrella, which we consider to be a real advantage for all of you. The legislative work also has been a delicate balance between continuity and the need for reform. Here, what I can say for IntraIGAP is at least we wanted to preserve, for instance, the rules to the extent possible in order for the program to focus more on a certain policy creativity. And we see the reform more in the proposals we are making with regard, for instance, the small project fund, the LEAPs and things like that, and less on the setup of the structures. For Interac Next, I understand it's a bit more challenging, but we are convinced that you will make it. And again, as we are saying, we really try to find the right trade-off between continuity and reform. We are convinced that those rules, obviously together with the CPR and the ERDF rules, should allow you to have a faster and more strategic programming, and that ultimately that's the most important, obviously, for all of us and for the potential applicants. And maybe the last word we want to share with you is that we consider that this external cooperation is really a unique form of cooperation, and this has really a specific role in the EU foreign policy toolbox. This apolitical cooperation, this grassroots cooperation is really something that is generally very much appreciated and that we want to continue to favor. So we hope that the rules that we have presented to you actually will really allow you to work well. Next slide, thank you, Robert. So you see, we wish you a very good luck with your the new programs, and obviously we are available after the break for all your questions. Thank you very much to all.